Hello, I'm Richard Chambers, Senior Advisor, Risk and Audit at Audit Board. And welcome to another in my continuing series, Agents of Change. Today I'm joined by an old friend, Russ Charlton. Russ's external and internal audit experience is focused on a wide range of companies, from high-tech startups to large public multinationals. He's currently serving as the Chief Audit Executive at Advance. Previously, he's held the position of Chief Auditor at both WeWork and Time Inc. Welcome to the show, Russ.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Good. Tell me a little bit about Advance. I'm not sure, maybe some of our viewers wouldn't know that company.
Sure. Advance is a privately held family company that is really a portfolio company. We own Condé Nast. That's probably one that everyone's heard of. But we also own Iron Man, which is not the comic book, but the triathlon, and a number of other portfolio companies.
Well, you've been in this in the media-related space for a long time. I think I first met you when you were at Time. And so you've certainly got a deep background and deep expertise in that field. And that field has certainly gone through a lot of transformation in the last 20 years, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, yes.
All right. You know, in my book, Agents of Change, and again, thank you for joining me to talk about being an agent of change, because when I think of agents of change in our profession, you're one of the folks who comes to mind because I've watched how you've helped transform organizations as you've moved through them. But in my book, I talk about that internal auditors need to embrace the change that they're immersed in, this era of what I call permacrisis, to help seek to derive value in their organizations. I define agents of change as those internal auditors who are catalysts for transformational ideas. That is, they're not content to just be there to provide assurance or advice, but they want to get in there and help the organization improve and move forward. What's your sense of that as a role for internal audit?
Oh, well, I absolutely agree. In fact, at Advance, we're not referred to as internal audit. We're referred to as risk advisory. So that's the actual name of the department. And the idea is to have a heavy mix of advisory work, and of course, a little bit of assurance thrown in. But we're there to help the company succeed. Again, it's a family business, and we want nothing more than for the family to be successful and for the businesses to be successful. So our goal is to go in, help, see where there's needs, and we can do that through, if it's a system implementation, we say, hey, let us come in up front. We'd rather give you our advice now rather than come back later and audit and tell you the things maybe that you didn't do so well. So clearly we want to help the companies change and grow. And quite frankly, some of our portfolio companies are not as mature as others. And so we can really add value because we bring a wealth of experience across our internal, our risk advisory organization.
Yeah, well, it's probably very timely to have someone like you in a role like you have, just because you've seen so much transformation in the industry. The past several years, as I alluded to a minute ago, have really represented a massive amount of disruptive change. The 2020s have just been we've lurched from one risk-induced crisis to another. We've lurched from the pandemic to macroeconomic disruption to geopolitical uncertainty. We're now dealing with all kinds of new risks and uncertainty related to AI and other technology innovations. I guess I would ask you, how can organizations ensure that their internal audit function is identifying and mitigating the risks that can swiftly undermine the company's ability to achieve its objectives, particularly in this very, very uncertain period?
In my opinion, and I don't know that it's universally accepted, but in my opinion, having internal audit very closely linked to ERM, or actually being an owner of ERM, has been a great way of doing that. When I came on board at Time Inc., which was a newly public company that spun off from Time Warner, the first thing the audit committee asked me was, what's going on with ERM here? And I said, we don't have ERM. They said, we'd like you to have ERM. So I volunteered to start it, and it was incubated out of my group. The same thing happened when I went to WeWork. There was no internal audit. I went there to start it, in preparation to go public, and I brought in ERM and internal audit. So I think by having the auditors involved with a company-wide risk assessment allows them to understand the risk beyond just whether or not a control is working or not in the financial area, but the broader risk of the organization. And while we may not audit every area of a company, or in our case, we have portfolio companies, we're certainly not everywhere across all those companies in any given year. we do speak to the heads of every one of those departments across all those companies at least once a year to talk about risk. And that makes my auditors much more aware of what's going on in the business.
You know, you talk about those instances where you help stand up ERM, and within publicly traded companies, particularly in the United States, it's very common for internal audit to also have responsibility for ERM. And I guess my question to you is, how have you found that when you're both head of internal audit and being responsible for risk management? How have you navigated any potential conflicts there? Any perceptions that maybe you don't have the objectivity when it comes to risk? How have you navigated that?
Well, it just occurred to me, I thought about it as you were saying that, is trust. And I was thinking back to the one of your other books, Trusted Advisor, and the trust that an auditor needs to build with the audit committee, particularly the chair, and the trust with the CFO and other C-suite management and other members of management. But when I went in and said, hey, I think I can do ERM and audit, and then if you guys have problems with that, here's how we can set it up to make sure that we don't run afoul of any sort of conflict. They're like, Russ, we trust you. We know that you're going to do the right thing. So I think as a chief auditor, building that trust, having those relationships with your audit chair, with your C-suite is the most important thing. But then just to be honest with yourself and realize, hey, I'm not managing risk. I am helping facilitate a risk management function to identify, assess, and mitigate risk. And the business has to manage it and mitigate it, but we help. And so I think that really sets us apart from actually being risk managers.
And what you're describing is a great environment in which you achieve connected risk, which Audit Board has been a huge proponent of the importance of connected risk, where you have all the key players in the organization are collaborating, communicating, working together, and staying aligned to help the organization ensure that it's got the right risk management. So has that been your experience?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I just presented at a risk management conference where we talked about like aligned assurance. But how do we, as in this case, I was there as the head of ERM, not as a chief auditor, but how do we make sure that all the various, I guess, owners or stakeholders in risk are aligned in what they're doing and making sure we're not running off in silos and doing things. And I think having internal audit involved really helps facilitate that, because we again are operating across various departments and can connect the dots.
So Russ, I just recently released the second edition of Agents of Change. And we pulled into this new edition a lot of the challenges and changes that have gone on in just the 3 years since we first published the book in 2021. And among those is just the challenges of artificial intelligence. Any insights on that in your from the early going here as a chief audit executive in terms of either risks that it might present to the company or how maybe internal audit's using it?
Sure. I'm not sure we have a long enough video to talk about all the things that come up when it comes to AI, but absolutely. So, part of my role is to be very closely involved with cybersecurity. So I see AI as both a risk and an opportunity in cyber. I think it's almost like an arms race. I think the bad guys are going to be using AI to attack, and we're going to be using AI to defend. I think in a media company, and as you mentioned earlier, I'm quite involved. My company has a lot of media. Using AI in various ways, whether it's helping to write articles. We own newspapers, we own magazines. We have to have journalistic integrity and guidelines around the work we do with AI. We have to, all the things that you're hearing about, making sure AI is free from bias and it's used in the right way, keeping data safe. So I think the auditor, and in my case specifically, I'm on a task force with our chief compliance officer. We are really looking across the businesses to decide where are the risks with this AI, what guidelines do we need to put out there, how do we stay ahead of this, from both using it for back office type things and also on the front side of our businesses themselves. So I see AI as playing a role in both my ERM, my risk, and my cyber world for many years to come.
Well, it's, I get asked a lot, do I think AI is going to replace internal auditors? And my answer to that usually is this. I don't think AI will replace internal auditors, but I do think internal auditors that don't use AI and don't understand it are at greater risk of being replaced. How do you feel about that?
Well, I completely agree. I think it's a tool that needs to be used. I think if an internal auditor never learned how to use a spreadsheet, they would have been replaced back 30 years ago, right? So absolutely, AI is a tool that must be used. I think it's a new skill set that I think will make auditing very interesting. Hopefully, it can take away some more of the more menial tasks, and we can use AI for that, and it can help auditors do even more what, as you know, we've been trying to do for decades, which is do more interesting and meaty things.
Absolutely. The role of assurance versus advisor versus change agent, all those different roles that an internal auditor can play, the different hats they can wear. I think the one that is most vulnerable to AI taking over is assurance. So those internal auditors, my perception is those internal auditors who are still kind of in their cave doing assurance work are the ones who are at the greatest risk right now.
I think so. What I hope is that those individuals will take advantage of the opportunity to now let go of that and move into the things that I think you and I have been talking about for years as far as where can we really add value to an organization. I can tell you in my team, they don't get that excited about going out and doing basic assurance work. They get excited when we say, hey, we've just bought a new company. Let's go figure out what they do and see where we can help them be better.
Yeah, I think that the internal auditors we're always going to have a role to play in assurance, but I think we need to turn it over to our newest, most trusted resource. Not completely turn it over, but bring in AI to help out because I think that's where we're going to get the greatest value out of it. When I talk about in the book the skills that it takes, the attributes that it takes to be an agent of change, we talk about having business acumen. We talk about being relationship builders in the organization, the importance of being strategic, and the importance of being innovative. Are there other things that you think a change agent in internal audit ought to have in their toolkit to be able to get out there and effectively help the organization change?
Well, I think a certain level of creativity, and whenever you mention creative and accountants together, it kind of has this bad connotation. I don't mean being a creative accountant, but I mean having a creative mindset. Wanting to go out and think of new and different ways to do things, and having just a natural curiosity. I think that's what really helps an auditor if they're really interested in the business and want to learn more about it. And I think that puts them in a position to be able to help. And I think without that, auditors won't progress.
Wow, some great insight, Russ. Listen, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for sharing your insights on what it takes to be a change agent in the 2020s, and look forward to catching up again soon.
All right, great. It was my pleasure.
I'm Richard Chambers, the Senior Advisor for Risk and Audit for Audit Board. Thank you for joining us in our series on Agents of Change.